Now, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. By the clock in this council chamber, it is now 9:30, so I will begin. As I've observed on previous occasions, the time in this building does seem to vary depending on which room you're in, but here it is 9:30. So, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Ryn Smith, and I'm the inspector that has been appointed on behalf of the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government to examine the Tunbridge Wells Allocations local plan. Now, I note that there are some folk here who haven't been here on previous occasions, and also we are conducting this hearing in a different room for the first time in the council chamber. On previous days we've been in committee rooms. So I will speak briefly about the arrangements for the use of this room. Before I do so, I would like to introduce you all to Lynette Duncan, who is the Examination Programme Officer. I'm sure everybody has at least been in electronic or phone communication with her over the last few months, indeed, if not seen her in person before today. I will provide an opportunity for Tunbridge Wells Borough Council to introduce themselves, and indeed other persons here present to introduce themselves once we've covered off all the opening formalities in relation to the use of the venue. So, in terms of the venue and arrangements, this is the last of 3 hearing sessions this week. After the conclusion of today's hearing, the examination will take a recess and hearings will recommence again at the beginning of December, 1st of December. And new agendas and a revised programme will be issued before hearings recommence. In terms of today, use of this room and the surrounding areas, the toilets, ladies' toilets are immediately to my right in the lobby outside the council chamber. Gents' toilets exit the council chamber lobby, turn left to the committee corridor, and about halfway down the committee corridor on the left is the closest gents' toilet. Emergency exits. There are no fire drills planned today, so if you do hear an alarm bell, it is the real thing. This room is very easy to exit from. Either door on either side of the chamber leads straight to the lobby, which in turn leads straight to the grand staircase. Go down it and go out of the front door. Council staff will be on hand to take you to muster locations once you've exited the building. You will note that I have a microphone in front of me. All of the proceedings in this examination are being digitally recorded, so that we have a complete contemporaneous note of all proceedings. We have had 1 or 2 technical issues with the microphones. Thankfully, we believe that yesterday those have been cured. However, if they recur for any reason, what I will do is I will take a brief break and ask the council's technical support staff just to restart the system so that we can actually make sure that it continues. Also, if one of them signals to me that somebody's voice is not going to the recording as well as it might, then I might briefly interject just to ensure that use of the microphone it is enabling us to get a good record. Whilst I'm also speaking about IT, you will note that I don't have the normal raft of documents behind me that inspectors in local plan matters typically have, but I do have a laptop on my desk. I have access to all of the documentation associated with this examination electronically, and that's how I propose to proceed. We're trying to be, if not paperless, then at least a less paper examination. Now, the arrangements for these hearings have been set out in a combination of the programme and agendas that were issued on the 29th of October. Does everybody that needs sight of those documents have them available? Excellent. Participation in the hearing sessions will be in agenda order, and when I introduce an item on which you've requested to speak, if you just place your Toblerone up on its end like that, in a manner where I can still see your name, then that will help me introduce you. Obviously, with relatively few people present here today, I don't think that's going to be a significant issue. We'll be breaking today at around 11 a.m. for about 15 minutes, comfort break in the morning, and I aim to resume the hearing session at or around 11:15. 1 p.m. is our normal appointed lunch. We will resume at 2 p.m. If the morning session ends naturally before 1 p.m, I will close it at that time, and we will resume in any case at 2 p.m, because that's when the public expect us to resume. In the afternoon session, I'm not proposing to take an afternoon break. It's a short session, it's only 2 hours, and we potentially have quite a lot of business to go through. So I will run that as a single session. We must conclude by 4 p.m, as I understand it, because the council chamber is required for an evening meeting. Now, can I start with the council and ask the council to introduce themselves, and then we'll go to the rest of the table.
Good morning, my name is Bartholomew Wren. I'm an Economic Development Officer here at Tunbridge Wells Borough Council.
Good morning, my name is Sharon Evans. I'm a Senior Planning Officer within the Planning Policy team. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Adrian Tofts. I'm Planning Policy Team Leader at Tunbridge Wells Borough Council.
Good morning, my name is David Scully. I'm the Landscape and Biodiversity Officer at Tunbridge Wells Borough Council.
Thank you very much for those introductions from the Borough Council. Mr. Scully, thank you. Yep, I can now see your Toblerone fully. That does help. Occasionally my memory for names might not be as good as it ought to be. So if I can move to the CPRE.
My name is Mark Booker. I'm a member of the District Committee of the CPRE and also chair the Town Forum's Planning and Development Working Group, and will speak on behalf of both.
Thank you very much.
Elizabeth Aikenhead. I chair the Tunbridge Wells CPRE District Committee.
Thank you very much. And then finally for Network Rail.
My name's Laura Kerrigan. I'm from Network Rail.
If I can just ask you to speak slightly more directly into the microphone. The advice on these is that if you're about 3 to 4 inches away, you should be captured reasonably well. I was just looking at the waveform on the computer over there, and it didn't bounce as high as it did with other people. And actually, there are plenty of microphones. There's no reason why you can't have one individually.
My name's Laura Kerrigan. I'm from Network Rail.
Thank you very much. That's much better.
And I'm Paul Best, Senior Strategic Planner for Network Rail.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now, I've got 1 or 2 minor preliminary and procedural matters that I just wish to cover before we move to the substantive items on the agenda. I will refer very briefly to programme changes that are in force, and to note that there is proposed to be a discussion of new data relevant to the land supply for C2 uses, elaborating on a paper that was submitted on Monday by Cooper Estate Strategic Land, and that's proposed to take place this afternoon at 2 p.m. in matter J on your agendas. Has an additional paper been produced?
Yes, sir. An additional paper was produced yesterday and circulated to the main party, Buchanan's.
Okay. I have yet to see that. Is there a version of it that is sufficiently agreed that I can view? So in other words, I can at least take some time over lunch to see it, rather than be responding to unseen words at 2 p.m.
Yes, so we can provide a draft. We've had no response from Buchanan's yet as to the version we sent them. So.
Okay. Well, given that we want to make as best use of our time at 2 p.m. as we possibly can, when we take the morning break, could you ask somebody to give them a prod if you haven't already heard from them by then? Because it will certainly, my engagement with the issues will be greatly improved if I have actually read the paper before we speak about it.
Yes, sir, certainly we'll do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the only other programme/agenda amendment in force is that discussion of new data relevant to all other housing land supply matters will take place in the morning on the 1st of December. There are no other changes to the programme or agendas of which I'm aware. No. Good. Are there any other preliminary or procedural matters bearing on how we organise ourselves today rather than substantively that we need to speak about before I start? Lady Aikenhead.
Just to ask whether we could have a copy of the C2 paper when it's available.
Absolutely. That paper, in common with absolutely every document that I accept in this examination, will become a public document.
Yes, but it would be helpful to have it before this afternoon.
I fully appreciate that. So
and I haven't got electronic access here.
Good point. If I can ask the Council if we can have, a guesstimate of the number of papers that we'll need to cover the remaining present interested parties and have some spares as well.
Yes, certainly we'll provide a number of hard copies of them.
Thank you very much. And obviously there'll be an update after the break as to progress in terms of when that's likely to appear. Are there any other preliminary or procedural matters that we need to deal with now? No. In which case, we can move to the agenda and to Matter C and Main Issue 1, which is Rail Strategic Safeguarding. And at this juncture, I would like to thank Network Rail very much for attending this morning. Because, as you'll be aware from the plan, we do have two proposals for the safeguarding of former rail lines in Strategic Policy ALSTR3. Now, one of these, I think, is very much within Network Rail's purview, so we'll deal with that one first. It relates to the Tunbridge Wells Central to Erridge line, and a possible end purpose is reuse of that line for rail services, although a green corridor use is also envisaged. The second component of ALSTR3 is a proposal to safeguard the Paddock Wood to Hawkhurst line, but that is just, as I understand it, a green corridor proposal. It doesn't, at this juncture, envisage rail reuse. So once we've dealt with Tunbridge Wells Central to Erridge, then if Network Rail sees it necessary to leave, I'd be very content if you did. Right. Having set out that order of play, who wishes to speak on this item? I'm sure Network Rail will, and I've got a number of questions that I want to put in play as well. CPRE, and obviously the Council. Well, that's simple. That's everybody. Okay. I'm actually going to reverse the normal order of play. What I've normally done in these hearings is to ask those essentially objecting to or commenting on a policy to speak first. But I'm very conscious that this is the Council's policy, not necessarily Network Rail's policy, and that there's a kind of operational interplay, and therefore it's probably far more appropriate to hear from the Council first in terms of just a very brief summary of their position on the justification for the policy, and we can then turn to Network Rail, and then I'll draw in CPRE as essentially a commentator upon it. So, all previously circulated paperwork is taken as read. If I can just ask the Council very briefly to summarise how they got to where they got to.
Thank you very much. What I'd intended to do actually was to provide a few updates which hopefully answer the question you've just posed. And they indeed supplement the Council statement which is outlined in TWBC/PS/23. With regard to the Uckfield to Lewis study, the Department for Transport has now commissioned consultants WSP Parsons Brinkerhoff to prepare a London and South Coast rail corridor study. This will be a broader study than was envisaged previously with regard to the Lewis to Uckfield study, and will explore opportunities for investment in existing and new rail capacity along the Brighton Mainline corridor. It will include consideration of the feasibility of schemes identified and take account of factors including demand, operational impacts, costs and funding. A meeting was held with stakeholders last week to discuss the study's scope and opportunities to be considered. It's my understanding that this will include consideration of links between Uckfield and Lewis as well as Tunbridge Wells to Erridge. The study will identify priorities for investment for the short term, that's 5 to 10 years, medium term 10 to 20 years, and longer term 20 plus years. It's currently expected that the study report will be prepared in draft form by the end of December. TWVC, Kent County Council and other local authority partners are working with consultants to clarify local growth requirements which will be taken into account as part of this work. To date, projected housing and employment forecasts identified in the Kent Growth and Infrastructure Framework have been shared with consultants, and these extend beyond the time horizon of the adopted Tunbridge Wells core strategy to 2031. It's hoped that the study will support the Borough Council's ongoing safeguarding of the infrastructure between Tunbridge Wells Central and West Station, and provide further direction regarding its future potential. An exploration of the feasibility of this route is also identified as a project within the recently adopted Tunbridge Wells Borough Transport Strategy. Given the growing demand for rail services in the borough and the potential for additional growth, which may be allocated in the Royal Tunbridge Wells as a consequence of the forthcoming local plan review, as well as to meet the identified objectives in the transport strategy, the Borough Council would wish to retain the safeguarding and therefore retain the potential for any future benefits that could arise from the reopening of the line. So that's basically our position there. Alongside the preparation of the London South Coast Corridor Study, Network Rail are also currently progressing the Kent Route Study, which is part of the long-term planning process for the rail network. I think I may well let Network Rail say a little bit more about that, as indeed Paul and Laura are leading on that project. And with regard to Sainsbury's, I have written to them on the 5th of November asking for clarification with regard to their position concerning their toilet block and land within their ownership that's associated with the policy. I've yet to receive a written response, but verbally they have indicated that they remain supportive of the safeguarding.
Very grateful for that summary of the latest position, which clearly has moved on and acquired greater detail and specification than was the case when the Council's written statement was submitted. Does anything else need to be added to that before I just check where things stand with Network Rail?
So I just wanted to draw your attention to a recent consultation document by Wealdon District Council on their issues, options and recommendations, which is currently out for consultation. And the consultation, I believe, closes on the 14th of December. They have a preferred option in their plan for safeguarding the route. And we as a Borough Council will be responding to their consultation, supporting them in their aspirations to safeguard the route. Yes, that's my understanding. They do have an adopted core strategy, but I believe this is a new policy that they are consulting on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, Network Rail. This may simply be a case of essentially responding in loud agreement with the Council, but if I could just ask you to introduce your perspective on, I guess, the shift that has occurred in terms of the movement of the Brighton Mainline Corridor Study, BML2, and essentially the underlying justification as you see it for policies in local plans that actually safeguard alignments.
Okay. Right. So, starting with the Brighton Main Line, we identified in the Sussex Route Study, which was published earlier this year, that work needs to be done to the Brighton Main Line to upgrade it, and that work is going ahead at the moment, the early development work. Then the government have announced the WSP WSPB study, which we have been involved in, although not myself personally. The Brighton Mainline 2 project we've been aware of for many years, and we have done some work with them in the past. And it'll be interesting to see how the WSPB report reflects that. And we've literally this year, in the last couple of months, started the Kent Route Study programme. So as part of the long-term planning process, we'll be looking at Kent rail services to 2023 and 2043. So we're going to start obviously with the long view, see what the passenger demand is expected to be, and then examine the rail network for pinch points and weaknesses, and then build up a plan to meet the 2043 targets and the 2023 intermediate target. And we hope to publish that in draft in September next year for a final fully consulted version in 2017. So on this case, with the Tunbridge Wells to Eridge and Eridge at the sort also Lewis Uckfield, we welcome any protection of that alignment, because although it may not be in the immediate future, we think that probably at some point in the future we will have to reopen lines. So any alignments that we can protect now would be a great benefit.
So essentially, drawing out of that, your view is that it's a sufficiently seriously entertained proposal to merit the continuation of safeguarding?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if I can just check in relation to the WSPB study, because in terms of leadership from that, that's coming direct from government, that's Department of Transport?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And so you are not a client or a driver to that?
No, we've been consulted on it, but that's all. So we've been involved in the interview part of it.
Okay. But presumably you're sufficiently aware of the brief for that work and its intended direction of travel.
Yeah.
And you factored that into the answer that you've given me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Which then really takes me to the final contribution made by Mr. Wren, because I mean the one slight dilemma that I must admit struck me about this policy in terms of practicability and delivery when I did site visits, and it's not a major issue at all. It is a toilet block, and it's part of the Sainsbury's supermarket that has the footprint of which has actually physically extended across what would inevitably need to be the rail alignment, because you couldn't otherwise turn the permanent way around the end of the Sainsbury's building and still enable it to access the tunnel through to Tunbridge Wells Central from Tunbridge Wells West without removing part of the footprint of the Sainsbury's supermarket. Now, what the council have provided to me is evidence that a very considerable number of years ago, Sainsbury's knew of and were, in broad terms, supportive of a safeguarding policy and had at least theoretically acknowledged the possibility of some physical reconfiguration of their site and maybe compulsory acquisition of land, etc. in due course. I'm very glad, Mr. Wren, that you said you've written to them again, because that was going to be my one observation. I felt that was a letter that had, I think from memory, was written when I was probably a junior planning assistant at the London Borough of Bromley. And an entire planning career has nearly elapsed since that letter was prepared. I'm not sure it stands for much in evidential terms now. So, if you were able, before the end of this examination, to get a more concrete response from them in the here and now, that would be considerably more reassuring that this is, actively supported by the landowner most seriously affected, as well as being generally supported in strategic terms. Is there anything else that Network Rail needs to?
So I just wanted to add that earlier this year we had a project to upgrade the power supply at Tunbridge Wells, and I objected to the location of the site because it would have blocked the junction to the tunnel. So we have actually moved that site and kept the tunnel junction clear. So we are actively on our side protecting it as well.
Okay. That, again, is reassuring, because it's important to see that a policy is practical and deliverable and being put into effect. Okay, now CPRE wanted to make some observations by way of commentary on this, so CPRE.
Thank you, sir. As I mentioned, both CPRE and the Tunbridge Wells Town Forum have put in written submissions to the inquiry, strongly supporting the Council's line on retention and safeguarding of the alignment. You've heard that the Chancellor George Osborne has supported the study, which will include that alignment. We believe that if London Brighton via Uckfield, where major housing development is planned, goes ahead later in the plan period, Tunbridge Wells Brighton is likely to figure as part of the BML2 scheme in order to relieve existing pressure on the saturated London to Tunbridge main line. Network Rail considers the Tunbridge main line a major barrier to growth. The route cannot be quadrupled, but a solution is necessary. Tunbridge Wells is a major generator of commuter traffic on the line, and reopening its former alternative main line from Tunbridge Wells to London via Ashurst and Oxted would allow trains to run to London on a fully developed BML2 with potentially direct services to Canary Wharf and interchange with Crossrail, avoiding congestion at London Bridge. At a local level, reopening of the whole former route would open up the following opportunities: 12 coach trains for London via Oxted and also London via Tunbridge, calling at Tunbridge Wells Central and High Brooms from Tunbridge Wells West. The Central is not capable of properly accommodating 12 coach trains and never will be. Regular rail services from West Kent to Brighton on the south coast, an improved public transport interchange with possibility of a new bus station, large multi-storey car park, potentially part underground, for commuters, shoppers and office workers, taking the pressure off our streets. If you've taken the trouble to walk around the streets of Tunbridge Wells, you'll be aware that there is a major problem there. A rebuilt Sainsbury's, additional retail and some limited residential on the edge of site under potential redevelopment as a major area of change under the local plan review is something that we will advocate. And a continued heritage centre at the Spa Valley Railway engine shed under its lease arrangement with Sainsbury's. I think the alignment problem has been adequately dealt with by what has just been said. The Tunbridge Wells West Station building was figured in your questions, sir. The existing building at the old West Station could be suitably accommodated. The existing business could be suitably accommodated elsewhere on the site if it was determined that that building was required for railway use. However, a modern station on the site would be more likely to be developed as an integrated part of any redevelopment. So it's perhaps more likely that the Old West Station would remain as a heritage asset, allowing the existing use to continue. You've also asked about the Spa Valley Railway and its continued operation, sir. I'd like to deal with that in some detail. It's currently valued as a tourist attraction. You mentioned your career at Bromley. Around about that time, I opposed the original closure of the line. That was in 1983. I was then a young man. It's not yet clear that We're no doubt that the long-term planning policy interest of Tunbridge Wells lies in the potential reopening of a mainline connection from West Kent to Brighton via Tunbridge Wells and an additional mainline connection from Tunbridge Wells to London, above maintaining the present scale of operation of the Spa Valley Railway as a tourist attraction. It's not yet clear that the Spa Valley operation beyond Greenwich will prove financially viable in the long term. They have to maintain about a mile of railway track to mainline standards for Network Rail, and that is a considerable expense and impediment to operations. There would certainly be a realistic prospect of continuing a weekend heritage service between Tunbridge Wells West and terminal run-round facilities at Greenbridge by negotiation with Network Rail should a reopening take place. Such an arrangement currently exists between the North York Moors Railway and Network Rail between Grosemont and Whitby, so the precedents and all the legal documents are already there in existence for negotiation. At the very least, there'd be a realistic prospect of maintaining the Spa Valley Railway as a heritage centre at the Tunbridge Wells West engine shed, yard and sidings, with the opportunity of arranging occasional rail excursions onto the main line. The Great Western Railway Centre at Didcot manages very successfully on this basis without having any actual running lines, but with occasional access to them. The Spa Valley Railway has a potentially valuable asset in any negotiations with Network Rail, as it owns the track bed from the A26 bridge as far as Birchton Junction. Long-term financial stability for a continuing preservation trust based at Tunbridge Wells West could be guaranteed by the payment of substantial wayleaves by Network Rail for future use of this infrastructure. That would be one possible way forward. So, to summarise, we're confident that the principal heritage assets of the Spa Valley Railway at Tunbridge Wells and Greenbridge could be realistically safeguarded should the line reopen to mainline traffic. And we believe that the opportunity for creating this alternative link to London and renewed link to Brighton is one which justifies fully the safeguarding of the alignment at this stage. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, there seems to have been a resounding outbreak of agreement. I mean, the only matter which is not fully concluded is whether or not Sainsbury's are quite as engaged as maybe they ought be. But if that was a matter that maybe Council could pursue, CPRE, not quite. Can you just turn your microphone on? Thank you.
Coming back on that point, Sainsbury's are known to be innovative. They were innovative in allowing the Spa Valley Railway to have the engine shed rather than demolishing it in the first place. They are involved in redevelopment work in other parts of the country. They're very alive to schemes, and although it's essential to maintain the present alignment, we would not rule out the possibility of there being a major redevelopment of the whole site and the alignment being adjusted accordingly.
No, indeed, and that's noted, but I guess we are trespassing quite strongly now into the subject matter of local plan development rather than this plan. All I need to assure myself of is that we have a sufficiently supported and a sufficiently effective policy that means that it should remain in force rather than needing to be removed because its prospects of delivery were low. So that's the nature of the investigation that I've been conducting, and I think we've probably reached the end of the questions that I need to ask on that. If I can just check with the Council to see if there's anything else that wasn't picked up by either Mr. Wren or Mr. Tofts.
Just simply to say, as soon as I receive a response from Sainsbury's, I'm happy to forward that on to the programme officer for your review.
And we'll have it published. Excellent. Thank you very much for that contribution. In which case, I'm assuming that Network Rail have absolutely no interest in Buell Water whatsoever. So if you do wish to leave, then please take this opportunity. CPRE, are you staying for Buell Water?
Inspector, we haven't dealt with the other rail line yet.
Of course we haven't. Of course we haven't. But Network Rail had no interest in that either. That was... Apologies. All I was going to test there, because I don't think there is any active concern about that proposal or any deliverability effectiveness matter that sort of bears on my considerations that's outstanding. So I was just merely going to test, and I'll start with CPRE. If there's anything else that you think I need to take into consideration in relation to that element of STR3.
Yes, there is. We'll come on to this when we deal with Paddock Wood and its surroundings. We did touch on it on day one, but the surrounding villages of Paddock Wood rely on Paddock Wood as their main shopping centre, and certain of the villages have minimal, if any, public transport to Paddock Wood, so they rely almost entirely on the car, and hence on being able to park in in Paddock Wood centre. Now, the major redevelopment site, mixed-use site proposed in Paddock Wood, proposes that the existing Tunbridge Wells public parking will be maintained. That at least that level will be maintained. But there is a proposal to build the best part of 1,000 new houses on the periphery of Paddock Wood. I cannot see that Paddock Wood, that some of those, that all of those people will walk or cycle into Paddock Wood. I foresee that those people, some of them, will need to use the public parking in Paddock Wood. In addition to that, part of that, those two major sites that together sort of form one block in the centre of Paddock Wood off Commercial Road. Part of that is currently used as a temporary car park, which is providing, I think, about 50 spaces, and which is very well used and which is really enabling Paddock Wood at the moment to function well, to be a place where from the surrounding villages you can get in. I see at the moment no policy decision that that car park is going to be maintained. That's the one where you pay £4 a day to park as opposed to £5.50 in the station car park or even more in the Tunbridge Wells car park. So this, at least this railway line, if maintained, if created as a green corridor, will enable people from Horseman Den, probably not from Goudhurst, that's a long way, but people from Horseman Den at least will be able to cycle into Paddock Wood. It probably won't help Brenchley very much, but it will at least provide some help towards resolving that issue.
So, support in principle for the strategic allocation proposed, and essentially a plea back to the council for some active engagement in kind of green transport planning or the like, to enhance walking and cycle usage of a greater level of green infrastructure to help to manage parking demand in central Paddock Wood. Okay, that's simple. That's clear. A response on that from the council. Mr. Tofts.
Yes, in regards to that, obviously we will be discussing infrastructure matters in relation to Paddock Wood as part of Matter F.
Yes.
We would support use of the route for commuting or recreation or any of those kinds of uses. At present, the policy only seeks to safeguard it, to bring it back into use, and my colleague David Scully may be able to tell you a bit more about where we are with that project and the timescales and what work is carrying on to deliver it.
Indeed, thank you very much. And I mean, it would be helpful here, Mr. Scully, if you can cover off, I guess, the nature of green corridor, because there's a green infrastructure corridor potentially moving into use as maybe a kind of Sustrans equivalent sort of cycle route or walking route, and then there is one that might be developed as an ecological corridor providing or restoring connectivity between sites with habitat values, and they're very different and maybe possibly not compatible with one another.
Thank you, sir. Yes, green corridors or green infrastructure is multifunctional space essentially, and can fulfil a range of opportunities and uses. In this particular case, the former railway line has been identified as a green corridor, particularly for providing alternative walking and cycling routes as an option. In a borough, particularly as you'll see towards the east, where topography is very challenging, having a track bed that's been formed across the landscape at a gentle gradient could be extremely useful in helping deliver such a scheme. These schemes are difficult and take a long time to bring forward, and we are at the sort of very early stages, and safeguarding the route for future exploration is, I believe, essential if we are ever to make any progress on such a scheme. And despite our network of rural lanes, which are quite attractive, they're not very attractive to recreational cycle users in particular because of conflicts with traffic and so on.
I have direct experience of that.
So,
there are some entanglements with cyclists on site visits that have been interesting.
Yes. So our green infrastructure plan, which is adopted, does identify this route and talk about the opportunities for making recreational green routes through the area. So this could be an important project for that. There is a well-formed, well-established group in the community that represents most of the parish councils affected that have been working on this project for some time. I have here now you'll see we've mentioned in our response about a heritage assessment of the route. I have the first draft of it in my hand, sir.
So, thorough-looking document.
It is very thorough indeed, and it does show that a large proportion of the line and its track bed remains in place and has not been compromised. There are inevitably compromises that have occurred, but there's still a substantial amount there, including a number of very significant structures owned by the Highways Agency residual railway group. So, and they are cooperating with the project as well. So there is a very real prospect, and indeed we have already secured an improvement. A development of a solar farm has taken place near Paddock Wood, which you'll have seen, and that developer is in the process of commissioning with the Borough Council a design scheme for waymarking across the whole route, and they will, as part of that scheme, install two elements in relation to their development. a finger post and a monolith which mark the route and commemorate the heritage aspects of the route, which is also very important. Not a major feature of green infrastructure in itself, but an element that, as a local authority, we have a responsibility for. So it is, say, something which we are wishing to take forward. We do recognise the difficulties, but the safeguarding is a very, very important element of that process, and so we would strongly recommend to you that this policy is taken forward.
Thank you very much. Just one remaining question in my mind. Just remind me of the extent of the route that essentially falls within the hands of the Highways Agency, Historic Rail Residuary body.
Board, whatever, yeah.
Just trying to remember. It's changed its name so many times in the last few years. I'm struggling to recall what its proper title is. Because my recall was that some of the alignment has passed out of that ownership, and so there are bits of it that present challenges in that you've got disconnections.
Yeah. They only own a very small amount.
Right.
Principally the structures. There's 2 tunnels and I think 3 bridges. Sorry? Not on the. It's a tunnel and not sure it's a viaduct. There's a tunnel and bridge. But those structures remain with the authority. They own sections of track bed associated with those structures. They're not entirely clear themselves of their whole land ownership in terms of track bed, but I wouldn't say it's significant. It isn't necessary for the scheme such as this to open up the whole of the original route. Indeed, there's some reasons for diverging from it, where there's opportunities to do so using existing footpaths and bridleways. But the route, say particularly in challenging areas of topography and where there are structures such as tunnels and bridges, the track bed there will be very, very important.
But to cut a very long story short, at the moment, you've got no reason to believe that re-achieving connectivity with an appropriate pattern of easements or the like is feasible.
That's right. We do believe it is feasible, but it's very difficult. As the project advances, we may well be able to refine the policy over time, rather than just leaving it as a blanket policy. But for now, until that more detailed work has been done, the appropriate way is to safeguard the whole route.
Look, that maybe just takes me to one possible observation on the policy, which is not one that had occurred to me previously. I'm just turning it up. Because the actual alignment shown on the policy map is a precise one, and it follows essentially the historic trackbed, whereas the project has realised could potentially be slightly broader than that. All I was wondering about is whether there would be worth adding to paragraph 2.48 or somewhere around there on page 28 some words that essentially capture that and do flag the possibility that implementation of this policy may include investigations of land within a broad corridor and therefore the corridor shown on the policy map is a kind of indicative corridor, rather than it's not quite as specific as a traditional allocation. It's more like a structure plan policy in a funny sort of way, or a UDP Part 1 strategic policy. It's an indication of direction.
I'm grateful for that suggestion, sir, and indeed I think it's probably something similar to that we have in the Green Infrastructure Plan, and I'm sure we can provide some wording for that purpose, if that's acceptable to you.
Well, look, I think that would be helpful, because I think it would actually assist you if you end up needing to deal with, maybe in future, applications for particular proposals that might prejudice a much more advanced easement-based alignment proposal that actually isn't on the alignment shown on the policy map, but delivers the purpose that the strategic policy is intended to deliver.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. We will endeavour to provide that, I think, probably through the programme officer in the next day or two, if that's acceptable.
Indeed. Okay. Have we then reached the end of Matter C main issue 1? Is anybody else with anything else to say?
No, we're content from our side, sir.
Okay. CPRE. In which case, Matter C main issue 2, water storage strategic safeguarding. Now, here, clearly I have read the Southern Water written statement and the Council's written statement. I guess one approach to those documents that have been provided is that the matter appears straightforward, because if Southern Water have amended their asset plan and no longer seek the policy to safeguard an opportunity to increase the depth of water in Buell Water in the period up to 2040, then there is no basis for the retention of this policy or the supporting explanatory material. And the Council have agreed that in those circumstances they would seek a modification to strike the policy out of the plan in its entirety. Even though that may appear to be the case, I guess I can't help but observe a little regret that Southern Water aren't here today, because actually I would have quite liked to have seen the whites of their eyes on this one. I am grateful to Network Rail for putting in what may have appeared to be, a long journey for a relatively minor purpose, but there's absolutely no doubt that organisation have a commitment to that strategic policy. With Southern Water, we have their writing, which makes clear that they don't propose to rely on the policy as drafted. I guess what I felt it necessary to do before I leave this topic, though, was firstly to provide an opportunity for anybody else, and I do note CPRE are here, to make any observations that they wish to on that. And also, I wanted to just go back to at least the Council and confirm that there would, in the Council's view, have been no linkage between the creation of any additional storage capacity at Buell Water and any strategic requirement for water supply that might arise by way of response to any of the policies or proposals in this plan. Because if there is any conceivable linkage, then we need to have a care before we strike out a policy. So what I think I'll do here is, if I can go to CPRE first and just ask for observations on where we find ourselves, and that will give the Council a little thinking time, and then I'll come to the Council.
Yes, Inspector, we share your unease about this, and we would have very much liked to have been able to question Southern Water on this. Kent has in the past been, and we have no doubt will continue to be, an area where there are, from time to time, water shortages. I think there's been a hosepipe ban, in several years that I can remember. And I would like to be really sure, before we remove this safeguarding from Buell, that there is really no likelihood that they are ever likely to want to enlarge the reservoir. Now,
ever's a long time.
Well,
at least in the time threshold up to 2040, which is their strategic
plan. Even after 2040, I'll be dead and gone, won't be affected by it. But, we are seeing now the results of the beaching cuts and, looking to reverse them, and the difficulties when the land hasn't been safeguarded. And it is perhaps reasonable to ensure that Buell water isn't built up to its edges, and that therefore there aren't vast difficulties in enlarging the reservoir should that need to be done. Now, it may be that Southern Water have concluded that they will not be allowed to abstract enough water from the River Medway to fill Buell water up if it's enlarged. In other words, that is really not a starter. And reading their drought, water resources and drought strategy, I get the impression that they've decided to store water in the aquifers, in the chalk downs, rather than in Buell water. But that's very much a layman's interpretation of what I'm trying to, and that, they've given up on the idea of abstracting enough water out of the Medway to fill up an enlarged Buell water. But it would be nice to know that before we abandon this safeguarding policy.
Well, those words very closely mirror my own thinking, because at the moment I can easily infer why they might have abandoned a raising of Buell as against a number of other potential supply augmentation projects. But that's only inference, and it's not evidence, and at the moment the responses that I have been given do not, to me, clarify in hard terms precisely why the decision has been taken, beyond modelling work carried out for water resources in the South East Group identified that the enlargement of Buell Reservoir would increase storage capacity, etc., and then moving on to say, sorry, that was the wrong paragraph. Moving on then, so this is paragraph C 2.3 in their written statement. Since that time, and following extensive consultation with our regulators and customers, Southern Water has developed its strategy for supply drinking water in the period 2015 to 40. In October 2014, we published our updated strategy, and the raising of Buell water is not currently identified as a preferred water resource option. So it doesn't say that it cannot be because it would be unable to meet, say, for example, the Water Framework Directive in terms of the achievement of water quality targets or requirements for the Mersey, which is a very... so, bear with me. Wrong river. I did have a case recently up in Liverpool on the Medway, which would be a hard reason for the approach that they're proposing to take, and one that would place the soundness of their position, beyond dispute. So I'm minded to actually write a further written question, I think, to Southern Water. I don't think this is something that the Council needs to worry enormously about, because I will formulate a question that will ask whether there is any further background evidence, because I can only rely on what they've put to me. It isn't for me to go into a trawl of their public-facing strategies that they may have prepared, but they haven't introduced as evidence in this examination. I need something that can go into the examination library that they have put in, so I can refer to it in a transparent manner. So I'll ask them the question in writing, and indicatively I will give them until the document deadline for the second part hearings in order to respond to me.
I think that would be really helpful, Inspector, and also perhaps to check whether they have taken account of the very latest schmars.
Yes.
Which
is an equivalently good point. Which then takes me on, unless there's more that arises from CPRE's perspective, to return to the Council, because I had asked that in-principle question. Is there any conceivable linkage between, particularly the growth proposed to be accommodated in this plan, but actually looking forward, between water storage at Buell Water and the growth requirements of this borough?
I think at this stage, the indications that we've had is that, obviously, from Southern Water, you've seen the information that they've submitted. I would like to draw your attention to the IDP as well, which obviously the Council have produced in support of the site allocations document. That's core document 3.46b.
Yeah.
And within that document at page 21, we refer to the fact that even though there is, we were assuming that there would be an enlargement of Buell at some point, it wouldn't be until beyond 2030 in any event. And that's why the policy within the site allocations document was a safeguarding policy rather than an actual allocation at this stage, because our indications from Southern Water was that it wasn't required as an allocation during this plan period. So that's kind of our status within the IDP. And that was all information that came from the South East Plan as well, going back to that time. But I think you're right in the question about the future growth and the findings of the SHMAR and the work that we've got to carry out as part of the local plan review. And obviously we will be needing to liaise with Southern Water as we commence that process, which is what we will be intending to do as we start looking at the growth that is proposed through the new local plan. We will need to be talking with all infrastructure providers to gain an understanding of what infrastructure is required to support that growth, and Southern Water will need to be part of that process. But as you're sort of querying, can they be sure at this stage that safeguarding the land isn't appropriate for that longer term growth? So I think we would support the approach that you've proposed to write to them to further clarify the position, because obviously, as you're aware, we were only notified at a very late stage of their change in stance at the same time as you were. So I think some further clarification would be really helpful.
Mr. Tufts.
Yes, I just wanted to add the policy in the site allocations DPD was written very much with neighbouring authorities in mind as well, and we were informed by the existing policy in the Rother core strategy, which safeguards the land around Buell, and so it was written very much with that in mind. But as I mentioned earlier, the Wealden issues and options plan is out for consultation at the moment, and I have noted that there is no reference to safeguarding Buell in that document.
If it is not too much trouble, Mr. Tofts, maybe contemporaneously with my letter to Southern Water, which is perfectly appropriate for me to do because they are a representor, they're inside this examination. But I think it would be a little bit strange if I start writing to neighbouring councils that aren't representors. But if you did feel able to literally email both Wealden and Rother and just ask for a latest position statement and their understanding, informed by such conversations as they may or may not have had with Southern Water about whether a safeguarding policy is or is not sought moving forward, then at least we know that something hasn't fallen between the cracks. Because when there's a piece of infrastructure that's of that substantial scale, it's shared between a number of authorities, and indeed shared across a county boundary as well, there is potential for things going wrong in a very unlooked for and rather horrible way. So if you could report back to me on the outcome of those at the deadline for December documents, that would be really helpful.
Yes, we'll certainly do that for you, sir. Yeah.
I'm very grateful. Okay. Is there anything else then, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to touch on in relation to the Buell matter? I'm just getting my documents back under control.
So, may I just make an observation in respect to the landscape? I think in terms of supporting the policy, if you were minded to retain it, I think in that case, because it's in the area of outstanding natural beauty, there's a need to be fully satisfied it's absolutely necessary.
Yes, absolutely.
That way, rather than, is there any sort of uncertainty about removing it as well? So it would, I think, need to be a very clear intention and a very clear purpose of the Water Authority for all it to be included.
Yes. No, I hear what you say. I mean, that is a countervailing proposition that maybe indicates that unless there is utter certainty of forward delivery, albeit many years removed, that the policy maybe should go. But where we sit at the moment isn't quite as clear as I would like on either side of the balance. And, I again can't help but remark, I think this morning would have been much quicker in many ways and easier if Southern Water themselves had just come along, could have answered those questions directly, and we all could have left the room with a very, very simple and clear perception of whether or not that policy was necessary moving forward. Right. In which case, it is now 20 minutes to 11. Let's just... So, I think we do have time to move to matter C, main issue 3, before we take a morning break. Now, this is infrastructure delivery and SIL. And again here, as I see it, the main entities engaged are the council, who are here. Southern Water have made reference to this matter in their written statement, to which I've had regard, but they are not here. Do CPRE wish to involve themselves in this? Well, you're at perfect liberty to stay. You've got nowhere best to go, but I'm happy to. Okay. You may. Anybody who doesn't see this as a productive use of their time, by all means, feel free to disappear. Now, in relation to this matter, obviously I've seen the council's written statement. There was one remaining issue that I felt it was necessary to explore with the council, set out at paragraph 6 in the discussion points in the agendas, because the council clearly made reference to the viability analysis undertaken by Dixon Searle, which identifies 3 proposed allocations with poor viability and a further 3 with marginal viability. Now, this is actually pinning back to some of the detail that I suspect we'll need to go through when we're looking at individual site allocations for housing. Because I'm sure that we will have recitations of the individual representations to the extent that house builders believe that individual allocations are not sufficiently reliably deliverable by way of viability or by way of a range of other reasons, and they will then be suggesting that some additional land be allocated to ensure that the core strategies housing targets at least are met, setting aside the broader argument. So, what I just wanted to do was to ask for Council's latest thinking on that position. Essentially, does the viability work as it currently stands mean that there is an argument for an allocation delivery margin? And does that mean additional sites?
If I can just respond on some of those individual sites that were identified within the high-level viability work. It'd be helpful just to put a bit of context, but I appreciate your point that we will probably come back to them at a later stage when we deal with those individual sites at the sessions in December.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But just by way of just a short sort of summary, those sites which were identified as having poor viability within the high-level viability work carried out by Dixon Searle, there were 3 sites. Policy ALPW1, which was the mixed-use site within Paddock Wood, the Station Road Commercial Road site at Paddock Wood. And that's a mixed-use site within the town centre. It's a site that has been in the mix for a while. There's been a variety of sort of uses put forward for that as being, potential uses on that site. But it's not a site that we have relied on in terms of meeting housing need or any other sort of need that goes to the kind of soundness to the plan in sort of quantities. We've said a mix of uses could be appropriate, and I think sometimes there are difficulty in assessing such sites in viability terms when you've got a flexible policy that allows for a mix of uses. To actually quantify that at this stage in the high-level viability work can be quite difficult. But we're assuming that with the amount of growth that's going to be happening at Paddock Wood, a mixed-use site in the town centre providing uses which will support that growth is something that will be really positive and something that will come forward as probably land values and the sort of the general sort of attractiveness of Paddock Wood as a settlement is improved. So that's just a bit about the Paddock Wood one. Southborough Hub is a AL policy, ALSO2, which is another mixed-use site within Southborough. My colleague Bartholomew has had a bit more dealings with that site, but again, that's a mixed-use site proposed for some residential community uses, and I think really it was the community use that possibly sort of had alarm bells in terms of viability. But we understand there are funding regimes which can kind of alleviate some of those issues. And then the other mixed-use site is ALRTW. I haven't got the number there. It's the Grove Hill Road site in Tunbridge Wells, another mixed-use site, which again, Sorry, going back to Tunbridge Wells now.
So it's ALRTW 24.
Yeah, this is another mixed-use site, which again has been an allocation for some time, and we've said sort of again a broad mix of uses could be appropriate on that site, and so that's another one that we've allowed some flexibility for hopefully a viable scheme to come forward on there. So they're really the three sites that come out as having poor viability.
Can I just interject very briefly there? And apologies, but because there are now only really a very small number of us in the room, it's almost just a conversation in a way. Turning to the first one, PW1, just remind me of the specific issues that are driving poor viability on that site, because again, I've been out there and looked at it, and it's a site in the town centre. I mean, I wasn't quite clear what, if any, problem there might be.
In terms of the summary that we had from Dixon Searle, viability consultants,
yeah.
I think it was potentially the mix that they were looking at. They were saying that I think because I guess it's quite a flexible policy, so it's quite difficult for them to kind of, we didn't have a specific quantum of kind of retail, and so it's quite difficult then to come up with a clear sort of viability sort of argument in terms of the exact quantum and mix and end user for that scheme.
This almost, I mean, again, this is it. This is becoming a reserved matter for December. But it is beginning to suggest that the inherent flexibility of the policy, although it's designed to be supported for the broadest range of beneficial outcomes, could maybe, by not painting a clear enough picture of what future intentions of the site is, be inhibiting the delivery of a viable outcome. So it's
yeah. I guess there's different ways of looking at it. By providing a flexible policy, then you would hope that there would be some scope there for a viable outcome to come, rather than having a policy that's so prescriptive that then you may struggle again in viability terms to bring something forward if you've been so prescriptive and markets change. So I think we're trying to provide a flexible policy over the longer term to ensure, because we see it as quite a key town centre site to support the growth at Paddock Wood. And we would like something to come forward on there that obviously stacks up in viability terms.
Well, again, I mean, if you can take that one away, and then when we cover nothing special to do other than that we'll be covering it in December anyway, but it would be really helpful to drill a little bit further into why that site has found itself with an indicator of poor viability, because, as I say, it wasn't apparent to me that it would be anything other than a reasonable site for the proposal. So I just need to understand that a bit more. Now, the Southborough Hub site, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my site inspection, again, I recall that this is the reasonably large site that wraps around the back of the existing Southborough Town Council building, and there's the theatre, stroke public hall, and there's a small group of either current or former council housing and some playing fields wrapped around the back, and then we're talking about the same site. So, and again there, it's a fairly substantial body of land in the core of the town, and seemed to make a fairly substantial contribution towards the delivery of your strategy for that centre. So again, if that's not viable, a greater sense of why is something that I felt I needed.
Can I just provide you with a bit of context regarding the Southborough Hub site?
Indeed.
You may not be aware that Tunbridge Wells Borough Council has been working in partnership with Southborough Town Council and Kent County Council for a significant period of time, but productively and with purpose in terms of developing a master plan over the last 2 years. And there are now legal agreements in place which provide direction with regard to partnership working to bring that site forward, as well as option agreements. We're now in a position where Kent County Council are essentially leading the master planning work, and it's expected that pre-application public consultation will be taking place at the end of the month to present, two viable options for the site. Yes, viability is a concern, but we're looking at the mix of uses and the massing very carefully to consider what can be delivered successfully.
So, more detailed work has been done more recently than the viability study, and your in-principle position would then be that the current state of evidence is that it's a viable and hence deliverable site for a bundle of uses that would conform with the policy that as you propose it.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Okay. Right. Well, again, if in your documentation for December you can actually use a couple of paragraphs just to tell that story and, if necessary, link back to a copy of the master plan and a reference to its current status in terms of the community consultation process it's been through, etc. Again, that would be very, very helpful, because it would, start to move on from a situation where, we had, in principle, what seemed to be a viability problem with a site that, on its face, looked as though it should be a deliverable site. Okay, and then RTW 24, and I was just turning up the map. And in fact, what this highlights is, because we've been talking very much at a level of principle about the contents of policy, what we haven't been doing during these hearings is what I'm now doing, going through a bundle of maps that have, because I've been moving through them, gone out of order. What would be very, very useful for the December hearings would be if we can either have a laptop that can project the maps, so that when we say suddenly we need the central area, the Tunbridge Wells central area proposal map, it goes on the wall, or alternatively, if old paper is more efficient and we just have pinboards and put the maps up in the hearing room, I think that would really assist in December. So, RTW 24 is...
It's down near the train station.
Oh yeah, got you.
Opposite Hooper's. Yeah. Again, well, probably this is one that we can come back to in the December session when we discuss this on the 1st of December. I think we've got an agent coming on that site as well, so I'm sure we'll have a more detailed discussion on that one at that stage.
Okay, so bringing to their conclusion the 3 poor viability findings from that study, overarching view that you've put to me, they're all sites with their very particular issues, and none of them essentially punch holes in large-scale deliverability in terms of the quantum of housing particularly. Okay, and then we had the marginal viabilities. There were 2 other sites.
Marginal viability sites are basically the greenfield sites at Paddock Wood. So ALPW3, which is land at Maskell's Court Road and Church Farm, Paddock Wood.
Yep.
And ALPW4, Maskell's Farm, Paddock Wood.
Okay.
And with these, slightly different situation, as I'm sure you're aware from some of the information that's been provided. We do have 2 current planning applications in on sites at Land at Mascalls Court Road and Church Farm, Paddock. They're current planning applications with our development management team. They've been in for quite some time. There's been a lot of discussion. There's still detailed negotiations going on those in terms of, a variety of issues. So there's some, we have planning applications in, and I think that was Dixon Sell's approach to that was that even though that some of the factors going into those in terms of the infrastructure which would need to be provided, and I think you made a note on that anyway in terms of sort of flood alleviation, there's primary school infrastructure, primary schools to be provided, transport infrastructure. So there are a range of issues on those which are being discussed at a detailed stage. The other site, the ALPW4 Mascalls Farm at Paddock, that is an allocation, and we don't have a planning application in on that, but we will be expecting one. I think the indication is that one would be coming in following the examination procedure. So there's certainly a lot of interest in those sites.
And again, my sense of the rationale for the scale of the allocations at Paddock Wood is by way of providing development of sufficient scale to support the large scale of infrastructure that's necessary to support any development. So your argument, as I saw it, was very much around it not really being viable to deliver a smaller scale of development in that settlement, because that wouldn't give you essentially the return, the yield necessary to cover off the flood alleviation costs and the education facilities, etc. So that's where that one's sitting. So that feels my understanding has been checked, and I feel as though I know where that one's going. So, if we then go to the kind of underlying issue that I wanted to test in that paragraph 6, at the moment, your conclusion in relation to the likelihood of any sites of marginal viability falling away is that you don't think they're likely to, and that therefore you wouldn't see there being a basis for additional allocations to be put in place in case they fall away.
No, not at this stage.
No, I just wanted to add in general terms to your opening remarks about alternative sites. As we discussed yesterday, we tried to build into the DPD a considerable margin of conservative sort of tallying of the totals, and from the discussions yesterday, we agreed to make the modifications, setting that out in the plan. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, I think then we have probably done paragraph 6. What we haven't yet dealt with are paragraphs 7 or 8, and then of course we've got main issue 4. But it is nevertheless 11 o'clock. So unless you've got anything more that you really need to put to me on that paragraph 6 of main issue 3. No.
No, we're content.
Right. Well, let's break now then until 11:15, and we'll come back in at paragraph 7 on main issue 3. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We're on Tunbridge Wells time again. In my room I was worried about being late, and here I'm still 2 minutes early. Which in a time span of 15 minutes is quite something. So no, we'll stick to this clock. It is now 1:15, so let's resume. We just reached the conclusion of paragraph 6 on the agenda under main issue 3, planning obligations and community infrastructure. And we were just about to move on to paragraph 7, and this relates to any remaining risks to plan delivery arising from the delivery of infrastructure requirements. Now, if I can return to the Council, who's leading on this? Okay, Ms Evans, the floor is yours. I asked essentially whether the relevant infrastructure identified in the infrastructure delivery plan or the Kent and Medway growth and infrastructure framework, whether all relevant infrastructure is provided for there, and are there any new conclusions emerging from any of that work that actually need to be taken account of in this plan. And again, you know, we'll get to the site specifics in December, and it may well be that the answer is all sorted. But where does it stand?
Yeah, you will have seen the statement that I
Yes.
prepared for this one, where I outlined the process that we've gone through to produce the infrastructure delivery plan,
Yep.
which supports the site allocations DPD. The most recent infrastructure delivery plan is the June 2015 version,
yep.
which I've referred to in my statement. We do term it a working draft because we see it as a iterative process. We update the IDP as and when necessary. We'd commit to reviewing it every 12 months, but if we felt that we needed to review it more frequently, then we would do in light of information that we're made aware of from other stakeholders, like Kent County Council or the NHS, CCG, those kind of stakeholders. So we would update it as and when necessary to set out new information or any new requirements. But the IDP does support the site allocations document in terms of the level of growth anticipated and the infrastructure that's required to support that growth. In terms of the Kent and Medway growth and infrastructure framework, this is obviously a document that's been produced by Kent County Council with their consultants ACOM. We've been working with Kent County Council and ACOM as well since earlier this year. We've seen various versions of the document. It's now been finalised, and it broadly concurs with the information that we have in our own IDP, as one would expect. We provided them with our IDP and any other information that was required. So there's nothing in there that contradicts anything that we have in our own IDP.
So just so that I'm completely clear about the relationship between the two documents and processes, it is very much a feed-up process into the GIF. It is not a kind of centralised push-down process where that is a separate process that's giving rise to new quantifications of need that then interpose new obligations to be met here.
No, it's something that we've worked with them, provided them with our own documentation, our own IDP, and our transport strategy, so that they're aware of all the projects that we have, which we will need to support the SADPD.
Okay, fine. I think I'm completely content with that then. Which then means that we can move on to paragraph 8, and this was just that remaining testing with you about the limitation on Section 106 pool contributions, and you've made very clear your position in relation to SIL, and you've made very clear your view that preparation of a charging schedule based on the core strategy and therefore supporting this plan would be potentially wasted work, because it would be work that would be very rapidly superseded, and that you view it as being far more appropriate to develop SIL within the framework of the emerging local plan. And you've also given me a clear view that from your perspective you see no reason at all why the pool contributions limitation should have any adverse effect on the delivery of particular infrastructures necessary to support any of the sites proposed to be allocated in this plan. And there's nobody else here saying anything else, so you get away with that one. No, that's not fair. I guess though, my intention by raising it in a sense strategically today was to try and flush out whether or not anybody was going to argue against that position, and to try and deal with it globally earlier, rather than allow it to kind of crop up as a roadblock in December. Maybe the relevant parties will be listening to the digital record of today and might actually realise that if they didn't attend today, they have missed somewhat of an opportunity. But no, if we need to return to this again in December, we might have to. It was merely an attempt on my part, given that I was here to try and save some time. But I think that, again, is as far as we can usefully go on that. So unless you have anything else to add, no.
No, I think we set it out clearly, as you say in our statement, in terms of our approach towards SIL, and that we'll be producing it alongside the documentation alongside the local plan review. And that's the advice we've had from our consultants, Dixon Searle, and we're not aware of any issues from other parties coming along to query that approach.
Okay. Which then takes us, without further ado, to main issue 4, delivery and implementation. Now there, again, you've set out your written statement. It's very clear. You've included in your appendix proposed drafting changes that would be considered to be an additional modification to the plan, which effectively apply the torque wrench to monitoring references in the plan. Now, and that all seemed pretty straightforward as it went. But I did just think, given the nature of the conversations we've had earlier on this week, that it might be worth looking at Table 3 as it sits there, because that may be a place where the specific monitoring of outcomes from particular policies and allocations in terms of ensuring that you're in a position to fully understand precisely how much business use, precisely how much housing, etc., is delivered, particularly out of the area of change and mixed use allocations in Tunbridge Wells town centre. A sense of the detail that underpins that monitoring and how you will use that to reinforce your evidence base in the preparation of the local plan could very usefully sit here. Now, you've probably independently reached that conclusion in any case. This is not rocket science, but that was the observation that I was going to make. So when you respond on that point that's already on the action list, it may well be that this revision that you've already submitted needs a further tweak. Does that feel sensible to you?
That concurs with the discussion we had this morning, in light of, as you say, the discussion we had yesterday, particularly in employment land monitoring, and obviously something may come up as we go through the hearing sessions that we may need to make further amendments to that table in light of any discussions or tightening up of monitoring arrangements. So if there's the capacity for us to be able to make further amendments as we go through
Absolutely.
the hearing sessions and possibly put to you a minor amendment at the end of at the conclusion of the sessions. I don't know what's the best approach, but then obviously that can reflect anything else that comes up.
Well, this takes us on to Matter J and what we'll be dealing with this afternoon, because there are two bodies of material that we need to cover this afternoon, less than I'd originally thought, which is very useful. But the first is that we need to have the substantive discussion of the C2 table material. We won't foreshadow that now because we'll wait for those who are intending to attend for it to attend and then go through it in detail. But then we'll also need to do a brief kind of review of what amounts to the action list, the things that the Council itself has on its list of undertakings or commitments further to the conversations that we've had this week. Because as I've said as we've gone through, there are opportunities to deal with all of those actions in the documentation for December and the December deadline, which is the 26th of November. But clearly we shouldn't get too fixated on whether those are final positions from the Council. My advice to you at this stage would be that they are indicative, pending the detailed conversations that take place in December, but they inform the December participants who can see what your response to these strategic discussions have been and then present their own positions accordingly, but that where we similarly have a Matter J, other outstanding matters and issues agenda item at the end of the December hearings, we'll need to go back through the list and ask the question again, well, has anything changed? So you're not completely nailed down at this iteration. These are indicative positions.
Yes, thank you, sir. That seems a very good way to move forward, and it gives us some idea of what we need to produce for the next stage.
Okay. So I thought I'd cover that briefly now, because I think that addresses that last point. So, it is only 11:30. But nevertheless, I think we have exhausted the agenda for this morning. I can very usefully just disappear to my retiring room and read and inwardly digest this material and also have a look at that correspondence to Southern Water. So it will be time well used. Other than that, reconvene here at 2 p.m. Will CPRE be with us in the afternoon, or have we exhausted your patience? Okay, well, of course, you're very welcome to be here. And With no more ado then, let's close this morning's session. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.